What happens when a marriage, meant to reflect God's love and order, breaks down? Follow Amara's journey as she escapes a toxic, abusive relationship, showing the devastating consequences of disregarding God's design for marriage. Watch as resilience and hope unfold and join the conversation about restoring love and commitment in relationships. Amara Jackson is the embodiment of success and resilience. In her early 30s, she's established herself as a marketing executive in a thriving company. Growing up in a close-knit black family, she was taught the values of hard work, integrity, and pride in her heritage. Her parents instilled in her the belief that she had to work twice as hard as her white counterparts to achieve the same level of success, and she did. Amara is not just ambitious in her career, but she's deeply passionate about her community. She volunteers at a local youth center, mentoring young girls who look up to her. She's a natural leader, radiating warmth, compassion, and strength. But despite her professional achievements, her love life has been less fulfilling. After a few relationships that didn't work out, she yearns for a meaningful connection, someone who can see her for the person she truly is. That's when she meets John Davis. Amara meets John at a networking event for local business leaders. John is charming and engaging, working in finance with a successful career of his own. He's tall, handsome, and seemingly open-minded, with a polite interest in Amara's work and her life. Unlike other men Amara had dated, John didn't seem intimidated by her success. He wasn't one to shy away from strong women, which made him even more appealing to her. Their connection is immediate. John is attentive, witty, and seems genuinely interested in her as a person. He doesn't balk when Amara talks about her experiences as a black woman in corporate America, nor does he shy away when she tells him about her commitment to the black community. John even admires her work at the youth center, encouraging her to continue her efforts. At first, their relationship seems like a perfect blend of two people from different worlds coming together. John is from a small conservative town in the Midwest, where discussions of race were avoided, and his family had strong traditional values. But he claims to have outgrown that mindset, telling Amara that he's more progressive now that he's been exposed to different cultures living in the city. Amara, in turn, appreciates his willingness to learn and be open to new ideas. As their relationship deepens, they spend more time together. John introduces her to his friends and colleagues, who are largely white and from similar conservative backgrounds. While they're polite, Amara sometimes feels the subtle tension in their interactions, jokes she doesn't find funny or an underlying discomfort when the topic of race comes up. John brushes it off as harmless or tells her she's overreacting. In her mind, she rationalizes that it's just part of being in an interracial relationship and chooses to focus on the good, how John seems supportive of her and how they are building a life together. 6 months later, they're married. In the beginning, their marriage is full of the usual happiness newlyweds experience. They buy a home in a predominantly white suburban neighborhood, where John's friends and colleagues live. Amara is excited about their future, particularly when she becomes pregnant with their first child, Lila. She imagines their family growing in a world that will embrace their differences, believing that love will conquer all challenges. But cracks start to appear in their seemingly perfect life. Subtle signs of John's discomfort with race-related topics emerge during her pregnancy. Amara, thrilled about the idea of raising a daughter who would be proud of her black and white heritage, talks to John about how they'll need to teach Lila about both sides of her identity. John, however, dismisses her concerns. She's just a baby, he says. We don't need to make a big deal about race. Let's just raise her like any other kid. Amara tries to explain that Lila, as a mixed-race child, will face unique challenges, but John waves it off. He insists that focusing on race only creates division, not unity. To him, racism is something from the past, something that doesn't need to be discussed in their home. This causes Amara to pause, but she convinces herself that maybe he's right. Perhaps love and a good upbringing will shield Lila from the harsh realities she had faced as a black woman. However, as Lila grows and Amara becomes pregnant with their second child, Mason, John's dismissive attitude becomes harder to ignore. Amara starts to feel isolated in her marriage. Whenever she brings up issues of race, whether it's about their children, their experiences in the world, or even her own struggles at work, John becomes defensive. Not everything is about race, he'd say, a tightness in his voice. You're always looking for problems. His friends, too, often make offhand comments that sting Amara more than John realizes, or perhaps more than he wants to realize. One evening at a dinner party, one of John's friends jokes about how their children will be the best of both worlds, as though their race is a novelty. Amara, feeling uncomfortable, glances at John, expecting him to say something, but he just laughs along with them. When she later confronts him about it, he dismisses her feelings. "It was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." Amara feels the weight of his words, how they downplay her lived experience as a black woman, how they invalidate the complexities of raising biracial children in a society still rife with racial tensions. But she loves him, and she wants to make their marriage work. She tells herself that maybe she's overthinking it, that John is a good man who just doesn't understand. As time goes on, John's subtle racism becomes harder for Amara to ignore. He makes comments about the thug culture in black communities when they watch the news, or he'll talk about the good old days when life seemed simpler, when people knew their place. Amara begins to realize that John's progressiveness was a facade, that underneath his charming exterior is a deep-seated discomfort, if not outright prejudice, towards her race. Still, she holds on to the hope that they can work through their differences. She suggests counseling, but John scoffs at the idea. "We don't need some stranger telling us how to live our lives," he says. "I'm not the problem here." It's not long before Amara starts feeling like a stranger in her own home. She becomes increasingly aware of how John tries to control her, subtly at first, insisting on handling the finances, criticizing her for being too focused on her community work, and even making her feel guilty for spending time with her black friends. He complains that she's changing, that she's not the same woman he married. In truth, Amara realizes, he's the one who's changed, or perhaps he's just revealing who he truly is. As Amara reflects on her marriage, she realizes that the cracks in their relationship are rooted in something much deeper than typical marital struggles. John's growing resentment and controlling nature, combined with his refusal to acknowledge or understand her experience as a black woman, lead to a decision that she's been avoiding for too long. She needs to leave, not just for her own sake but for the sake of her children. Her decision to divorce John will be the turning point in their relationship, but it will also set off a chain of events that will put her and her children's lives in danger. The love that once bonded them is now tainted with control, resentment, and hate, and Amara knows that escaping this toxic relationship will not be easy. As the years pass, the tension in Amara and John's marriage grows palpable. With their two children, Lila and Mason, now at school age, Amara's focus turns to preparing them for the realities of the world, realities John still refuses to acknowledge. Lila, now 6, is a bright and inquisitive girl. She loves art and often draws pictures of herself and her family, blending the shades of her skin with crayons of different colors. But at school, Lila begins to face subtle but hurtful comments from her peers. One day, she comes home visibly upset. When Amara asks her what's wrong, Lila explains that a classmate said her skin was dirty and that her hair was weird. The words cut through Amara like a knife. Amara knows this is only the beginning. As a black woman, she's experienced a lifetime of similar comments, but now that it's happening to her daughter, the pain feels even more intense. She tries to explain the situation to John, hoping he will understand that their daughter needs extra support in navigating a world that doesn't always accept her for who she is. But John's reaction is dismissive. "Kids say dumb things all the time," he says with a shrug. "Lila's fine. She just needs to toughen up." Amara's frustration builds. She knows this isn't just about kids being kids. It's about how Lila is beginning to experience the racial dynamics that will follow her throughout her life. She tries to explain this to John, but he cuts her off. "You always make everything about race, Amara. Can't we just let her be a kid without turning this into some racial issue?" Meanwhile, Mason, their 4-year-old son, is starting preschool. Though younger, Mason also begins to encounter challenges because of his mixed-race background. Some of the teachers seem to pay extra attention to him, not in a nurturing way, but in a way that seems suspicious. They talk to him more sternly, and Amara notices how they subtly treat him differently from his white classmates. It's something only a mother of color would notice, and when she brings it up to John, he's quick to dismiss her concerns. "I think you're being paranoid," he tells her. "Not everyone is out to get our kids, Amara." For Amara, these are not paranoid thoughts. These are the experiences that black and mixed-race children face all the time. She feels increasingly alienated from her husband, not only because of his refusal to acknowledge the challenges their children face but because of the emotional toll it takes on her. She is constantly exhausted from being the only one in the marriage who seems to understand the magnitude of the racial issues at play. As the tension over their children's experiences grows, John's behavior starts to shift even more dramatically. He becomes increasingly controlling, both over Amara's life and the children's. At first, it's subtle, but soon, his need for control starts affecting every aspect of their household. John takes over all financial decisions in the household. He insists that Amara shouldn't worry about money and that he'll handle everything. At first, this doesn't seem like a big deal. After all, John has always managed the bills. But slowly, Amara notices that he begins monitoring her spending more closely. He questions why she needs to buy certain things and starts limiting her access to their joint bank account. "You don't need to be wasting money on things we don't need," he says. Amara realizes that this isn't about managing finances. It's about John trying to control her, trying to make her more dependent on him. She feels increasingly suffocated, but any time she brings up her concerns, he brushes her off. "You're overreacting," he tells her. "I'm just looking out for our family." Amara's passion for community work, especially her advocacy for young black girls, has always been a source of pride for her. But now, John criticizes her every time she attends a community event or spends time volunteering. "Why are you wasting your time on that?" he asks. "You should be focused on our family, not running around with those people." Those words sting. Those people. It's becoming clearer to Amara that John's subtle racism is evolving into something more overt. She realizes that his comments aren't just about time management. They're about his growing resentment toward her connection to her black heritage and the people she associates with. John starts discouraging her from attending black community gatherings, making excuses as to why she shouldn't go or guilt-tripping her into staying home. When she does attend, he becomes cold and distant, often starting arguments afterward about how she's neglecting the family. John's control extends to the children as well. He insists on deciding which extracurricular activities they should do, and when Amara suggests signing Lila up for a cultural program to learn more about her black heritage, John explodes. "That's the last thing she needs," he yells. "You're just going to confuse her even more, filling her head with all this race nonsense." It's a shocking outburst, the first time John's anger has manifested in such a visceral way. His face turns red, and his voice is filled with venom. Amara feels the weight of his resentment, and for the first time, she begins to truly fear him. It's no longer just about disagreements, it's about control, and John is starting to lose his grip on it. The turning point comes one evening when an argument spirals out of control. Amara has been planning to take the children to a family reunion on her side of the family, a gathering that celebrates their shared black heritage. She's excited for Lila and Mason to meet more of their relatives and connect with their roots. When Amara tells John about the trip, he becomes enraged. He accuses her of indoctrinating the children and pulling them away from him. "This isn't your family," he yells. "This is our family. You're poisoning them with all this black pride nonsense. They don't need to be around those people." Those words, "those people," echo in Amara's mind. It's clear to her now that John's resentment of her black identity is deeper than she'd realized. His anger is no longer just about control. It's about a deep-seated racial prejudice that he's been harboring for years. The argument escalates, with John's voice rising to a terrifying volume. He accuses Amara of being a bad mother, of turning their children against him. His words are venomous, filled with anger and hatred. Amara, trying to remain calm for the sake of the children, tells him she's had enough. "I can't do this anymore, John," she says, her voice shaking. "This isn't a marriage. I'm leaving." One quiet morning, while John is at work, Amara packs up her belongings and leaves with the children. She moves into a small apartment on the other side of town, a place where she can start over and rebuild her life. The weight of her decision presses down on her, but she knows she's done the right thing. The divorce proceedings are difficult. John uses every legal trick he can to retain control, dragging out the process and trying to manipulate the court into giving him more custody of the children. His anger festers, but Amara holds her ground. She refuses to back down, knowing that she has to protect her children from John's toxic influence. However, even though Amara has physically left John, the psychological battle is far from over. John begins stalking her, showing up unexpectedly at places where she's supposed to feel safe. He bombards her with calls and texts, alternating between begging her to come back and threatening her with legal action. Amara's fear begins to grow, realizing that John's need for control has reached dangerous levels. Amara's decision to leave marks the end of her marriage but the beginning of a new, even more dangerous chapter. John's anger and resentment only deepen after the divorce, and his obsession with regaining control over Amara and their children pushes him down a dark and unpredictable path. Meanwhile, Amara begins to rebuild her life, but the threat of John's escalating behavior looms over her every day. The first few years after their marriage, Amara tries to ignore the growing disconnect between her and John, hoping things will improve. But after the birth of their second child, Mason, and as their first daughter, Lila, begins school, the cracks in their relationship widen. The racial divide between them, which was once dismissed as a minor issue, becomes the source of growing tension. Lila, a bright, curious 6-year-old, has just started first grade. One afternoon, she comes home from school unusually quiet. When Amara presses her, Lila reveals that a group of children at school teased her for her hair and her skin color, calling her dirty and weird. Amara feels a deep sadness, knowing these are only the first of many painful moments Lila will face as a mixed-race child. Amara tries to explain to John what happened, expecting him to feel the same hurt and anger she does. But John brushes off her concerns, insisting that kids can be cruel, and it's just part of growing up. "She'll be fine, Amara," he says. "You're making too big a deal out of this. Don't teach her to see everything through the lens of race." Amara's heart sinks. This is not about making something out of nothing. It's about preparing Lila for the world she will face as a child of two races. Amara feels the emotional chasm between them growing, especially as John becomes increasingly unwilling to engage in conversations about their children's racial identity. Meanwhile, their younger son, Mason, is starting preschool. At just 4 years old, he too experiences subtle but harmful biases. While most of the other children in his class are white, Mason stands out with his curly hair and slightly darker skin. Some teachers at the preschool seem to be a little harsher with him, holding him to a different standard than the white kids. Amara notices how they discipline him more sternly and watch him more closely, as though expecting trouble from him. When Amara brings this up to John, he dismisses her concerns entirely. "You're imagining things," he tells her. "Not everything is about race. You're just being paranoid." For Amara, it's not paranoia. It's a reality she understands all too well. She has faced these subtle forms of racism her entire life, and now her children are being subjected to the same. The disconnect between her and John deepens as she realizes that he will never understand, or worse, that he doesn't want to understand. The tension in their marriage grows as Amara and John's differing perspectives on race become more pronounced. But it's not just racial issues that begin to divide them. John's need for control over every aspect of their lives becomes more evident as time goes on. John begins to exert more control over the family's finances. What once seemed like practical decision-making on his part now feels like manipulation. He insists on handling all the bills and controlling their joint bank account, which leaves Amara with limited access to their money. Whenever Amara wants to buy something, whether it's for the children or herself, John questions her decisions, often accusing her of being irresponsible with money. "You don't need to be spending money on unnecessary things," he says, his tone sharp and dismissive. Amara, once financially independent, feels trapped. She's been contributing to the household financially, but John's control over the family's finances makes her feel powerless. Slowly, he tightens his grip, limiting her spending and making her feel guilty whenever she pushes back. Amara's commitment to her community has always been a source of pride for her. She's deeply involved in mentoring young girls of color, often attending community events and volunteering her time. But as John's control over her grows, he starts criticizing her involvement in these activities. "Why do you spend so much time with them?" he asks, his words laced with disdain. "You should be focusing on our family, not running around with people who don't even appreciate you." His comment stings. Amara realizes that John's issue isn't just with her time management, it's with her community and her black identity. He resents her connection to the black community, and it becomes increasingly clear that he wants her to distance herself from them. John's resentment toward her involvement grows over time. Whenever she goes to a community meeting or event, he becomes cold and distant, often starting arguments afterward about how she's neglecting the family. He accuses her of spending too much time away from the children, of caring more about her work with the black community than her own household. Amara starts to feel suffocated, knowing that she's slowly losing herself in this marriage. John's attempts to control her every move are no longer subtle, they're overt and relentless. But the worst part is that every time she tries to stand up for herself, John finds a way to make her feel like she's overreacting, like she's the one who's being unreasonable. John's need for control extends to their children as well. He insists on making all the decisions regarding Lila and Mason's schooling and activities. He's especially resistant to anything that would expose them to their black heritage. When Amara suggests enrolling Lila in a cultural program to help her connect with her identity as a mixed-race child, John explodes. "We don't need to fill her head with all that racial nonsense," he says, his voice rising. "You're confusing her. She doesn't need to be part of some black pride movement. She's our daughter, and we're going to raise her like any other kid." Amara is stunned by the intensity of his reaction. His anger over something as simple as cultural education is deeply troubling. She begins to realize that John's racism isn't just an annoyance, it's becoming dangerous. His refusal to allow their children to understand and embrace their full identity is part of his overall need to control everything, to shape the world in a way that makes him comfortable, even at the expense of his children's well-being. Amara's breaking point comes one evening during a heated argument. She's been planning to take Lila and Mason to a family reunion on her side of the family, where they will meet relatives and celebrate their shared black heritage. It's a tradition that Amara has always cherished, and she's excited for her children to experience it for the first time. But when she tells John about the trip, his reaction is explosive. "You're not taking them anywhere near those people," he yells, his face flushed with anger. "I don't want them around your family, filling their heads with all this race garbage. You're trying to turn them against me, and I won't let it happen." Amara stands her ground. "They deserve to know where they come from," she says, her voice steady but her heart pounding in her chest. "You can't keep them from their heritage." John's eyes narrow, and his voice drops to a menacing whisper. "You think you can take them away from me? You think you can just walk away with my children? If you leave, I'll make sure you never see them again. I'll destroy you, Amara." For a moment, Amara feels paralyzed by fear. She's never seen John like this before, his face twisted with rage, his fists clenched as if he's holding back from physically attacking her. But she knows, in that moment, that she can't stay. This isn't just about control anymore, it's about survival. In the days following the argument, Amara begins making secret plans to leave. She contacts a lawyer, sets up a bank account in her own name, and quietly finds an apartment where she and the children can stay. She knows that leaving won't be easy, that John will try to stop her, and that the legal battle will be brutal. But she's determined to escape, not just for her own sake, but for Lila and Mason's. Amara begins to pack her belongings slowly, under the guise of cleaning. She avoids confrontation with John, knowing that any sign of defiance could set him off. Every day, she feels the tension in the house mounting, as if a storm is about to break. One morning, while John is at work, Amara takes her chance. She packs up the children's things, loads them into the car, and drives away from the house that has become a prison. She doesn't tell anyone where she's going, not even her closest friends, for fear that John will try to track her down. She feels a mix of fear and relief as she drives, knowing that she's finally taking control of her life, but also knowing that John won't let her go easily. The divorce proceedings are grueling. John uses every tactic in the book to drag out the process, making threats about custody and using his financial power to intimidate Amara. He accuses her of being unfit as a mother, of trying to turn the children against him. His lawyers are ruthless, but Amara stands her ground. Throughout the legal battle, John's anger festers. He begins stalking her, showing up at places where she's supposed to feel safe, her workplace, the children's school, even outside her new apartment. He bombards her with threatening texts and phone calls, alternating between begging her to come back and threatening to take the children away. Amara's fear grows, realizing that John's obsession with controlling her has reached a dangerous new level. The first few years after their marriage, Amara tries to ignore the growing disconnect between her and John, hoping things will improve. But after the birth of their second child, Mason, and as their first daughter, Lila, begins school, the cracks in their relationship widen. The racial divide between them, which was once dismissed as a minor issue, becomes the source of growing tension. Lila, a bright, curious 6-year-old, has just started first grade. One afternoon, she comes home from school unusually quiet. When Amara presses her, Lila reveals that a group of children at school teased her for her hair and her skin color, calling her dirty and weird. Amara feels a deep sadness, knowing these are only the first of many painful moments Lila will face as a mixed-race child. Amara tries to explain to John what happened, expecting him to feel the same hurt and anger she does. But John brushes off her concerns, insisting that kids can be cruel, and it's just part of growing up. "She'll be fine, Amara," he says. "You're making too big a deal out of this. Don't teach her to see everything through the lens of race." Amara's heart sinks. This is not about making something out of nothing. It's about preparing Lila for the world she will face as a child of two races. Amara feels the emotional chasm between them growing, especially as John becomes increasingly unwilling to engage in conversations about their children's racial identity. Meanwhile, their younger son, Mason, is starting preschool. At just 4 years old, he too experiences subtle but harmful biases. While most of the other children in his class are white, Mason stands out with his curly hair and slightly darker skin. Some teachers at the preschool seem to be a little harsher with him, holding him to a different standard than the white kids. Amara notices how they discipline him more sternly and watch him more closely, as though expecting trouble from him. When Amara brings this up to John, he dismisses her concerns entirely. "You're imagining things," he tells her. "Not everything is about race. You're just being paranoid." For Amara, it's not paranoia. It's a reality she understands all too well. She has faced these subtle forms of racism her entire life, and now her children are being subjected to the same. The disconnect between her and John deepens as she realizes that he will never understand, or worse, that he doesn't want to understand. The tension in their marriage grows as Amara and John's differing perspectives on race become more pronounced. But it's not just racial issues that begin to divide them. John's need for control over every aspect of their lives becomes more evident as time goes on. John begins to exert more control over the family's finances. What once seemed like practical decision-making on his part now feels like manipulation. He insists on handling all the bills and controlling their joint bank account, which leaves Amara with limited access to their money. Whenever Amara wants to buy something, whether it's for the children or herself, John questions her decisions, often accusing her of being irresponsible with money. "You don't need to be spending money on unnecessary things," he says, his tone sharp and dismissive. Amara, once financially independent, feels trapped. She's been contributing to the household financially, but John's control over the family's finances makes her feel powerless. Slowly, he tightens his grip, limiting her spending and making her feel guilty whenever she pushes back. John begins to exert more control over the family's finances. What once seemed like practical decision-making on his part now feels like manipulation. He insists on handling all the bills and controlling their joint bank account, which leaves Amara with limited access to their money. Whenever Amara wants to buy something, whether it's for the children or herself, John questions her decisions, often accusing her of being irresponsible with money. "You don't need to be spending money on unnecessary things," he says, his tone sharp and dismissive. Amara, once financially independent, feels trapped. She's been contributing to the household financially, but John's control over the family's finances makes her feel powerless. Slowly, he tightens his grip, limiting her spending and making her feel guilty whenever she pushes back. John's need for control extends to their children as well. He insists on making all the decisions regarding Lila and Mason's schooling and activities. He's especially resistant to anything that would expose them to their black heritage. When Amara suggests enrolling Lila in a cultural program to help her connect with her identity as a mixed-race child, John explodes. "We don't need to fill her head with all that racial nonsense," he says, his voice rising. "You're confusing her. She doesn't need to be part of some black pride movement. She's our daughter, and we're going to raise her like any other kid." Amara is stunned by the intensity of his reaction. His anger over something as simple as cultural education is deeply troubling. She begins to realize that John's racism isn't just an annoyance, it's becoming dangerous. His refusal to allow their children to understand and embrace their full identity is part of his overall need to control everything, to shape the world in a way that makes him comfortable, even at the expense of his children's well-being. Amara's breaking point comes one evening during a heated argument. She's been planning to take Lila and Mason to a family reunion on her side of the family, where they will meet relatives and celebrate their shared black heritage. It's a tradition that Amara has always cherished, and she's excited for her children to experience it for the first time. But when she tells John about the trip, his reaction is explosive. "You're not taking them anywhere near those people," he yells, his face flushed with anger. "I don't want them around your family, filling their heads with all this race garbage. You're trying to turn them against me, and I won't let it happen." Amara stands her ground. "They deserve to know where they come from," she says, her voice steady but her heart pounding in her chest. "You can't keep them from their heritage." John's eyes narrow, and his voice drops to a menacing whisper. "You think you can take them away from me? You think you can just walk away with my children? If you leave, I'll make sure you never see them again. I'll destroy you, Amara." For a moment, Amara feels paralyzed by fear. She's never seen John like this before, his face twisted with rage, his fists clenched as if he's holding back from physically attacking her. But she knows, in that moment, that she can't stay. This isn't just about control anymore, it's about survival. In the days following the argument, Amara begins making secret plans to leave. She contacts a lawyer, sets up a bank account in her own name, and quietly finds an apartment where she and the children can stay. She knows that leaving won't be easy, that John will try to stop her, and that the legal battle will be brutal. But she's determined to escape, not just for her own sake, but for Lila and Mason's. Amara begins to pack her belongings slowly, under the guise of cleaning. She avoids confrontation with John, knowing that any sign of defiance could set him off. Every day, she feels the tension in the house mounting, as if a storm is about to break. One morning, while John is at work, Amara takes her chance. She packs up the children's things, loads them into the car, and drives away from the house that has become a prison. She doesn't tell anyone where she's going, not even her closest friends, for fear that John will try to track her down. She feels a mix of fear and relief as she drives, knowing that she's finally taking control of her life, but also knowing that John won't let her go easily. The divorce proceedings are grueling. John uses every tactic in the book to drag out the process, making threats about custody and using his financial power to intimidate Amara. He accuses her of being unfit as a mother, of trying to turn the children against him. His lawyers are ruthless, but Amara stands her ground. Throughout the legal battle, John's anger festers. He begins stalking her, showing up at places where she's supposed to feel safe, her workplace, the children's school, even outside her new apartment. He bombards her with threatening texts and phone calls, alternating between begging her to come back and threatening to take the children away. Amara's fear grows, realizing that John's obsession with controlling her has reached a dangerous new level. After leaving John, Amara's life shifts drastically. She moves into a modest apartment in a more diverse part of town, far from the suburbs where she used to live. The new community is vibrant, and for the first time in years, Amara feels a sense of belonging. It's a neighborhood filled with people who look like her and share similar experiences. The change brings her a renewed sense of hope, but it's also tinged with fear, knowing that John's anger is growing. Amara enrolls Lila and Mason in a new school, one where they won't feel out of place because of their race. Lila is noticeably more relaxed in her new environment, and Mason starts to thrive. They begin to make friends who share their background, and the school offers cultural programs that help them connect with their Black heritage, something John had tried so hard to prevent. At home, the mood is lighter. Amara no longer walks on eggshells, fearing John's outbursts. She begins to find her voice again, embracing her independence and rediscovering the parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of her marriage. She throws herself into her work, becoming more active in her community, and finds solace in her support system, which includes other single mothers and women of color who understand her struggles. But even as she begins to rebuild, the shadow of John's presence lingers. John's control may be gone, but his obsession isn't. He begins calling Amara incessantly, leaving voicemails filled with threats and emotional manipulation. "You can't take my children away from me," he snarls in one message. "You're going to regret this, Amara. I'll make sure you lose everything." The messages are a mix of rage and desperation. Some days, John begs her to come back, promising that he's changed and that things will be different. Other days, his anger boils over, with threats of legal action and custody battles. Amara knows these are empty promises and hollow threats, but the weight of his words still affects her. She changes her phone number, hoping to cut off contact, but John finds other ways to keep tabs on her. He begins showing up unexpectedly, at the children's school, at her workplace, and even at the community events she attends. His presence is a constant reminder that he's not willing to let go. As the weeks pass, John's behavior grows more erratic. Amara starts noticing his car parked outside her apartment late at night, the headlights off but the engine running. He's there when she picks up the children from school, lurking in the background, watching. Sometimes, she catches glimpses of him at the grocery store or the park, always keeping his distance but never too far away. Amara's fear begins to grow. She feels like she's constantly being watched, unable to fully relax. The once peaceful environment she had created for herself and her children now feels tainted by John's invisible presence. She knows he's waiting for the right moment to strike, and she's terrified of what that might mean. Realizing that John's stalking and harassment are escalating, Amara decides to take legal action. She files for a restraining order, hoping to protect herself and her children from John's increasingly erratic behavior. The process is difficult and slow, with the legal system offering little in the way of immediate protection. The court hearings are draining. John shows up, calm and collected, presenting himself as the victim of Amara's decision to leave. He paints a picture of himself as a concerned father, accusing Amara of trying to alienate the children from him. His lawyers are relentless, using every trick in the book to discredit her and portray her as an unfit mother. Despite the emotional toll, Amara stands her ground. She provides evidence of John's stalking, the threatening messages, and his attempts to control every aspect of their lives. Eventually, the court grants her a restraining order, but it's only a piece of paper. Amara knows that John's obsession won't end so easily. As the legal battles rage on, John's life spirals further out of control. He loses his job, partly due to his erratic behavior and the time he spent fighting Amara in court. With no career to anchor him, John becomes more isolated and consumed by his growing hatred for Amara. John begins to retreat into an online world that feeds his anger and resentment. He finds forums and social media groups filled with like-minded individuals, men who feel wronged by the women in their lives, men who believe the system is rigged against them. These groups are toxic echo chambers, filled with hate speech and violent rhetoric. John's worldview becomes even more warped as he spends hours reading stories of men who took back control after losing their families. The online communities validate his feelings of victimhood, fueling his belief that Amara is the enemy, that she has stolen his children and ruined his life. His anger festers, turning into a dangerous obsession. John begins to fantasize about regaining control, about punishing Amara for leaving him. The idea of her moving on, living happily without him, is unbearable. He convinces himself that she needs to be taught a lesson. John's mind becomes consumed with thoughts of revenge. At first, it's just dark fantasies, imagining Amara's life falling apart without him. But over time, those fantasies become more concrete. He starts following her more closely, learning her daily routines, watching for any signs of vulnerability. His thoughts turn to violence. He begins to stockpile weapons, convincing himself that he needs to be prepared for a confrontation. He tells himself that he's doing it to protect himself, but deep down, he knows that his intentions are far darker. Despite the restraining order, Amara knows that John is still out there, watching, waiting. She starts taking extra precautions, changing her daily routines, installing security cameras around her apartment, and making sure she's never alone when picking up or dropping off the children. Amara invests in a security system, something she never thought she'd need, but the fear of John's growing obsession has left her with little choice. The cameras are her only solace, providing a small sense of safety, even though she knows they're not enough to stop him if he decides to act. She talks to her lawyer frequently, asking what more can be done to protect herself and her children. But the legal system moves slowly, and the restraining order is only a temporary solution. Her lawyer advises her to document everything, every interaction, every time she sees John lurking nearby. Amara does so diligently, but it feels like she's waiting for something terrible to happen. Lila and Mason are old enough to sense the tension. They've seen John outside their school, lurking in the distance, and they've heard the arguments during the court hearings. Lila, in particular, has become more withdrawn, no longer the bright, bubbly girl she once was. She asks Amara why Daddy is always angry, why he won't leave them alone. Amara struggles to find the right words, knowing that the truth is too painful for her young children to understand. Mason, still younger, clings to Amara more than ever. He's scared of being away from her, terrified that something might happen while they're apart. Amara tries to comfort them, but the strain is visible in their daily lives. The once happy, hopeful environment she worked so hard to build is now overshadowed by fear. Amara finds some solace in her community. Her friends rally around her, offering support and protection. They accompany her to court hearings, help watch the children, and even provide financial assistance when the legal bills start to pile up. Amara's involvement in the community also deepens during this time. She begins to advocate for other women who have faced similar situations, especially women of color who, like her, have been failed by a system that often doesn't take their fears seriously. Her work with domestic violence survivors becomes a lifeline, giving her a sense of purpose amidst the chaos. Despite the growing fear, Amara refuses to let John take away her spirit. She knows that she's stronger than he ever gave her credit for, and she's determined to protect her children, no matter the cost. As weeks pass, the tension in Amara's life escalates. Despite the restraining order, John's presence looms larger and more threatening. Amara can feel it. The culmination of his anger is approaching, and it's only a matter of time before he makes his move. The unease has spread throughout her home, and her children are more anxious than ever. Amara takes every precaution, but deep down, she knows that she's dealing with a person who has lost touch with reality. One fateful afternoon, Amara is at home preparing dinner while Lila and Mason do their homework. The security cameras she installed capture everything happening outside, but on this day, she doesn't need them to sense danger. There's a sudden knock at the door, a knock too forceful and urgent to be anyone other than John. Her heart sinks. She knows this is it. She tells Lila and Mason to go to their rooms, locking the doors behind them. The children sense something is wrong, their wide eyes betraying their fear, but they obey. Amara takes a deep breath, trying to gather her strength. She approaches the front door cautiously, her mind racing as she tries to decide what to do. Another knock, this one louder, more aggressive. She can't avoid it any longer. Slowly, she opens the door just enough to see John standing on the porch, his face twisted with rage. His eyes are bloodshot, and his body language is volatile, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Amara," he says, his voice low and menacing, "we need to talk." Amara knows that there is nothing to talk about, but she also knows that shutting the door on him could provoke an even more dangerous reaction. She steps outside, closing the door behind her, blocking his path to the children inside. "I have nothing to say to you, John," she says, her voice calm but firm. "You need to leave." But John doesn't leave. Instead, he steps closer, towering over her. "You think you can just take my children and walk away?" he snarls. "You've ruined my life, Amara. You've turned them against me, and you're going to pay for it." Amara can see the desperation in his eyes, the wildness that has taken over. He's not here to talk. He's here to assert his control one last time. "I haven't turned anyone against you, John," she says, holding her ground. "You did that yourself. And now you need to go, before things get worse." John's face twists in fury, and for a moment, Amara wonders if he's going to hit her. He raises his fist, and her heart races, but before he can act, a voice breaks the tension. "Hey, what are you doing?" It's Amara's neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an older woman who lives next door. She's standing on her porch, arms crossed and glaring at John. Amara's other neighbors start to notice the commotion as well, stepping outside to see what's happening. Within moments, a small group has gathered, watching John with wary eyes. John hesitates. He wasn't expecting an audience. His anger falters for a moment as he glances around at the people staring at him, and Amara seizes the opportunity. "You need to leave now, John," she says again, her voice stronger this time. "If you don't, I'll call the police. And so will they." She gestures to the neighbors, who are already holding their phones, ready to intervene. John's face contorts with frustration. His anger hasn't subsided, but the pressure of being watched forces him to back down, at least for now. He steps away, his jaw clenched tightly. "This isn't over," he growls, before turning and storming off to his car. As soon as he's gone, Amara's body shakes with relief. She knows this was just a temporary reprieve, but for now, she's safe. The neighbors approach her, asking if she's okay, offering their support. She thanks them, grateful for their intervention, but the fear lingers. She knows that John will be back. Amara doesn't waste any time after the confrontation. She immediately calls her lawyer, explaining what happened and asking for further legal protection. Her lawyer advises her to report the incident to the police, which she does, and they file a report detailing John's violation of the restraining order. But Amara knows that even though the law is technically on her side, enforcement is inconsistent. She can't rely on the police alone to keep her safe. With the support of her lawyer, Amara files for full custody of Lila and Mason, citing John's escalating behavior as evidence that he's unfit to be in their lives. The legal proceedings are grueling, with John's lawyers fighting hard to preserve his visitation rights. John presents himself in court as a concerned father who is simply trying to remain part of his children's lives. But Amara's evidence, the stalking, the threats, the violation of the restraining order, paints a very different picture. The court proceedings drag on for weeks, but Amara's determination never wavers. She knows that her children's safety is at stake, and she won't let John's manipulation succeed. With the help of her lawyer and testimony from her neighbors, the court eventually grants Amara full custody, with supervised visitation for John. It's a bittersweet victory. Amara is relieved that the legal system finally acknowledged the danger John poses, but she knows this won't stop him. His obsession with her and their children has reached a dangerous tipping point, and she can't afford to let her guard down. In the aftermath of the court decision, Amara's community rallies around her. Her neighbors, who witnessed the confrontation, become more involved in keeping an eye on her and the children. They set up a phone tree, ensuring that someone is always available if Amara needs help. Some of the men in the neighborhood take turns patrolling the street at night, watching for John's car or any sign that he's nearby. Amara's friends from the community center offer emotional support, helping her manage the stress and fear that come with living under constant threat. One of her friends, Selena, who works in social services, introduces her to a local organization that helps domestic violence survivors. Through this organization, Amara finds resources and connections that give her more tools to protect herself and her children. The support from her community is overwhelming in the best possible way. Amara begins to realize that, while she had once felt isolated in her marriage, she's not alone anymore. She has people who care about her and are willing to stand by her, no matter what. Despite the legal victory and the community's support, Amara knows that the threat isn't over. John's obsessive behavior has only escalated since the divorce, and his confrontation on her doorstep was a clear indication that he's not going to back down easily. Amara takes additional steps to protect herself and her children, knowing that the next time John shows up, it could be worse. Amara upgrades her home security system, installing more cameras around the perimeter of the house and motion detectors on all the doors and windows. She teaches Lila and Mason how to activate the alarm if they ever feel unsafe, and she drills them on what to do if John ever shows up again. It breaks her heart to put that burden on her children, but she knows it's necessary. She also reaches out to local law enforcement, providing them with all the details of John's stalking and harassment. The police now have a record of John's actions, and Amara insists on increased patrols in her neighborhood. The officers assure her that they're watching for any sign of John's return, but Amara remains skeptical. She knows how often cases like hers fall through the cracks. As much as she tries to maintain a sense of normalcy for her children, the stress of living under constant threat takes its toll. Amara struggles with anxiety, her mind always racing with the thought of what John might do next. She attends therapy, both for herself and with her children, to help them cope with the trauma of their past and the lingering fear of their present. Lila, now 7, has become more withdrawn since John's confrontation. She's old enough to understand that her father is dangerous, but too young to fully process the weight of that realization. Amara worries about her daughter's emotional health, knowing that the fear they live under is affecting her deeply. Mason, still younger, clings to Amara constantly, afraid to be away from her for even a moment. For a while, things seem to settle down. John doesn't make any more appearances, and Amara begins to hope that the legal actions have finally deterred him. She starts to relax a little, enjoying moments of peace with Lila and Mason, attending community events, and rebuilding her sense of stability. But there's a nagging feeling in the back of her mind, a sense that this calm is only temporary. She knows John, and she knows that his silence likely means he's planning something bigger, something more dangerous. Amara remains vigilant, constantly checking her security cameras and keeping her phone nearby in case she needs to call for help. The peace that Amara had managed to carve out for herself and her children is shattered one late evening. It's a quiet night. Amara is putting Mason to bed while Lila reads quietly in her room. Outside, the neighborhood is still, and the familiar sense of safety begins to settle over her, despite the constant vigilance she's maintained. But then, the motion detectors on her security system go off. The soft chime echoes through the house, followed by the sharp ping of her phone as the app alerts her to movement outside. Amara's heart skips a beat. She looks at the monitor and sees it, John's car, parked just outside the driveway. Amara's heart pounds in her chest as she quietly locks Mason's bedroom door, whispering to him to stay inside. She grabs her phone and rushes to Lila's room, instructing her daughter to do the same. Lila, now old enough to sense the danger, obeys without question, locking the door behind her. Amara knows John isn't here just to talk this time. The look in his eyes the last time they met was filled with too much rage, too much obsession. She grabs her phone and dials 911, her hands trembling as she speaks to the dispatcher. "He's here," Amara whispers, barely able to keep her voice steady. "My ex-husband. He's here outside my house." The dispatcher reassures her that officers are on their way, but Amara knows they might not arrive in time. She quickly arms the security system and moves to the front of the house, where she can see John standing outside, pacing back and forth on the lawn. His figure, barely visible in the dim streetlight, is tense and menacing. Amara watches through the window as John approaches the house, pounding on the front door with his fists. "Amara," he yells, his voice hoarse with anger. "Open the door. We need to talk." The force of his pounding rattles the door, and Amara's fear spikes, but she refuses to open it. "Leave, John," she shouts through the door, her voice trembling but firm. "I've called the police. They're on their way. You need to go." John ignores her. His voice is filled with desperation and fury as he continues to bang on the door. "You can't keep them from me. You've taken everything from me. My children, my life. You can't just walk away." Amara steps back from the door, her breathing shallow. She knows she has to stay calm, for Lila and Mason's sake, but inside, her fear is overwhelming. The minutes stretch on, feeling like hours as she waits for the police to arrive. John's pounding on the door grows more frantic, and she can hear him muttering to himself, his words slurred and incoherent. She realizes with horror that he's likely intoxicated, making him even more dangerous. Then, just as Amara feels her control slipping, something unexpected happens. The sound of voices, her neighbors, cut through the chaos. Several people have gathered outside, drawn by the noise, and they begin shouting at John, telling him to leave. Mrs. Thompson from next door, Selena, and a few others have come out of their homes, forming a protective circle around Amara's house. "Get out of here, John," one of the men shouts. "The cops are coming." John, caught off guard by the growing crowd, turns toward them, his face twisted in fury. "This is none of your business," he shouts back. "Stay out of it." But the community stands their ground, refusing to let John intimidate them. Amara watches through the window, tears of gratitude filling her eyes as her neighbors, people who barely knew her before but have come to support her, confront John. For the first time in a long time, she feels like she's not facing this threat alone. Within minutes, the sound of sirens fills the air. The police pull up to the house, and John, realizing he's outnumbered and out of options, tries to flee. But the officers are quick to act, surrounding him before he can get to his car. They order him to the ground, and though he struggles at first, he's eventually subdued and handcuffed. Amara watches from the window, her body shaking with relief as John is finally taken away. The tension that had been building for so long begins to drain from her body, and she slumps against the wall, her legs weak. The nightmare, it seems, is finally over. The days following John's arrest are a whirlwind of legal proceedings, but for the first time in years, Amara feels a sense of relief, knowing that John is no longer a threat. He's charged with violating the restraining order, stalking, and attempted breaking and entering, and the court denies him any further visitation rights. The judge, recognizing the severity of John's behavior, grants Amara full custody of Lila and Mason, with no possibility of future contact. Though the legal battle is finally over, the emotional toll lingers. Amara knows that healing from years of psychological abuse and fear will take time, not just for her but for her children as well. But with John out of the picture, they finally have the space to begin that healing process. Amara's community continues to play a pivotal role in her recovery. Her neighbors, who stood by her during the confrontation, become close friends and a vital support system. Selena and others from the Domestic Violence Survivor Organization help her navigate the emotional complexities of rebuilding her life, offering resources and counseling for her and her children. Lila and Mason, though still processing the trauma of their father's actions, start to return to their joyful, carefree selves. Lila begins participating in cultural activities again, regaining her confidence, and Mason starts to feel more secure in their home, no longer afraid of what might happen. Therapy helps them both, giving them the tools to express their emotions and cope with the past. As Amara settles into her new life, she becomes more involved in advocating for women who have gone through similar experiences. Her work with domestic violence survivors becomes her passion, and she starts speaking out publicly about the intersection of race and domestic abuse, how women of color often face additional barriers when trying to escape abusive relationships. Through her advocacy, Amara finds a new sense of purpose. She begins organizing events, workshops, and fundraisers to raise awareness and provide resources for women in crisis. Her work brings her into contact with other survivors, many of whom look to her as a source of strength and inspiration. As the years pass, Lila and Mason grow into thoughtful, resilient young adults. Though the scars of their early years with John remain, they've learned to find strength in their identity and experiences. Lila, in particular, becomes passionate about social justice, following in her mother's footsteps as an advocate for racial equality and women's rights. Mason, though quieter than his sister, channels his experiences into creative pursuits, finding healing through art and music. Both children, despite the trauma they endured, grow into compassionate, empathetic individuals, determined to make the world a better place for those who face similar struggles. For Amara, life finally begins to feel like her own again. The constant fear and tension that once dominated her existence have faded, replaced by a sense of peace and hope for the future. She has built a life where she and her children can thrive, surrounded by love and support. Though the journey has been difficult, Amara's strength and resilience have carried her through the darkest times, and she knows that they will continue to guide her in the years to come. The final scenes of the story show Amara standing tall, watching Lila and Mason play in the yard, free from the shadows of their past. The sun sets in the background, casting a warm glow over the scene, a symbol of the new beginning they've all earned through their courage and determination. The sense of normalcy Amara works so hard to create for herself and her children feels fragile. Every day she checks her security system and scans her surroundings. The fear of John's return is always present, like a shadow in the corner of her mind. But for the past few weeks, there has been no sign of him. No calls, no sightings, no pounding on the door. She begins to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he has finally given up. It's a quiet evening. Amara is in the kitchen preparing dinner, Lila is working on her homework in the living room, and Mason is playing with his toys. The house feels calm, but a part of Amara remains on edge, instinctively aware that things are too quiet. Then, the motion sensor on the security camera alerts her phone. Her heart races as she glances at the screen, and the familiar sinking feeling returns. John's car is parked outside, his figure barely visible in the dim light, standing by the driver's door, watching the house. Amara feels a wave of fear, but this time, something inside her clicks into place. She won't let this fear consume her. Not this time. She immediately locks the doors and windows, tells Lila and Mason to go into their rooms, and picks up the phone to call the police. As Amara speaks with the 911 dispatcher, John starts pounding on the front door. His voice is a mixture of anger and desperation. "Amara, open the door. We need to talk." His fists slam into the door, rattling it on its hinges. Amara can feel her pulse quicken, but she stays focused. "I've called the police, John. They're on their way. You need to leave." But John doesn't back down. His voice rises, becoming more frantic. "You can't keep the kids from me. You've taken everything. You think you can just walk away?" Inside, Amara's instincts kick in. She stays calm, repeating that the police are on their way, trying to buy time. She moves toward the back of the house, keeping herself between John and her children, who are safely locked in their rooms. Her thoughts race. She knows this confrontation is different. John is more erratic, and she fears he might try to force his way in. Then, through the window, she sees movement in the street. Her neighbors have noticed the commotion and begin gathering outside. Mrs. Thompson from next door, Selena, and several others form a loose circle on the sidewalk, keeping a watchful eye on John. "Get out of here, John," Mrs. Thompson shouts. "We've called the police too. You need to go." John's face twists with rage. "This is none of your business," he yells back, his voice breaking. But the crowd doesn't waver. The neighbors stand firm, ready to intervene if necessary. For the first time, John seems to realize he's outnumbered. He glances at the growing group, his eyes darting between them and Amara's front door. His breathing is ragged, his hands shaking. Amara watches him closely, her heart pounding, but she stays silent. She knows any wrong move could set him off. The sound of sirens cuts through the tension. John's head snaps toward the street as two police cars pull up to the house. Officers step out, calling to him to back away from the door. John hesitates, his fists still clenched, but as the officers approach, he knows the confrontation is over. Defeated, he takes a step back, raising his hands as the police surround him. The officers arrest him on the spot, charging him with violating the restraining order and attempting to break in. As John is led away in handcuffs, Amara feels the overwhelming weight of the situation lift from her shoulders. Her legs nearly give out, but she steadies herself, watching as the car with John inside drives off down the street. It's over. For the first time in years, Amara feels the tight grip of fear loosen. She knows there will still be challenges ahead, but for now, she and her children are safe. With John in custody, the threat that had loomed over Amara's life finally fades. The court proceedings move swiftly after the confrontation, and John is charged not only for violating the restraining order but also for stalking and harassment. The judge grants Amara full custody of Lila and Mason, permanently cutting off John's visitation rights. The legal battle that once felt like it would never end is finally over. But even though the immediate danger has passed, the emotional scars remain. Amara knows that healing will take time, not just for her but for her children, too. Amara focuses on rebuilding her family's sense of safety and stability. She upgrades her home security even further, but more importantly, she works on creating a home where her children feel safe, loved, and free from fear. She arranges counseling sessions for herself, Lila, and Mason, knowing that they all need a space to process what they've been through. At first, Lila is quiet during their therapy sessions, but slowly, she begins to open up about the fear she's been carrying. Mason, too, starts to express his anxieties, though in his own, more reserved way. Through therapy, the children learn how to articulate their feelings, and Amara watches as they begin to reclaim their joy and confidence, little by little. Amara's community becomes an even stronger pillar of support. The neighbors who stood up for her during John's final confrontation remain close, always checking in, offering help, and reassuring her that she's not alone. Amara's relationship with Selena deepens, and they continue working together to support other women in the community who have faced domestic violence. Amara also begins to speak publicly about her experience, giving talks at local events and partnering with organizations that provide resources for survivors of domestic abuse. She shares her story not only to help others but also as a way of healing herself. The more she speaks out, the more she feels a sense of empowerment. Her voice, once stifled in her marriage, has returned stronger than ever. Lila and Mason, despite their young age, begin to flourish in the safe environment Amara has created. Lila finds her passion in dance and begins attending classes regularly, using movement as an outlet for the emotions she once struggled to express. Her confidence grows with each passing day. Mason, quieter and more introspective, channels his experiences into drawing and storytelling. He spends hours creating intricate worlds on paper, reflecting his own journey of understanding and coping with the past. Through these creative outlets, both children find ways to move forward without being held back by the trauma they endured. Amara's work with domestic violence survivors evolves into a full-fledged mission. She helps organize workshops, participates in fundraisers, and even speaks at national events, advocating for stronger protections for women and children facing domestic abuse, especially women of color, who often face unique barriers in seeking help. She becomes a voice for the voiceless, sharing her story not to relive the trauma, but to empower others who may feel as lost and trapped as she once did. Through her advocacy, Amara finds a new sense of purpose, and she knows that every time she helps another woman escape a dangerous situation, she's giving back in a way that truly matters. The final scenes of Amara's story take place in the home she fought so hard to protect. Lila and Mason are playing in the yard, laughing together as they chase a soccer ball under the late afternoon sun. Amara watches from the porch, the sound of their laughter bringing a soft smile to her face. The weight of the past is still there, but it's no longer suffocating. The fear that once consumed her life has been replaced by hope. Hope for a future where her children can grow up free from the shadow of violence, and where they can embrace their identities and experiences without being held back. Amara knows the road to healing is long, but she's ready for it. With the love of her community, the strength of her children, and the resilience she's found within herself, she is finally able to look toward the future with hope. The scars from her marriage will always be there, but they no longer define her. The story ends with Amara closing a chapter in her life that had been filled with pain and fear, but also with incredible strength and resilience. As she watches her children grow and heal, she knows that the life they're building together will be one of joy, safety, and love. She has fought for her freedom, and now, she and her children are ready to embrace the future they deserve. Amara's journey is not just one of survival. It's a powerful story of resilience, strength, and the unyielding power of hope. From a life overshadowed by fear and control, she found the courage to break free, not only for herself but for her children. Through every hardship, every threat, and every confrontation, Amara remained steadfast in her commitment to protect her family and rebuild her life. At the heart of her story is a message of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Amara's ability to stand up to the abuse and manipulation, even when the system seemed stacked against her, is a testament to her inner strength. She fought through legal battles, emotional trauma, and the suffocating grip of fear, yet she never lost sight of what mattered most: her children's future and her own sense of self-worth. But Amara's story is also about the power of community. It was not just her strength that carried her through, but the support of her neighbors, friends, and those who believed in her. The people who rallied around her, stood by her side, and helped her when she needed it most showed that no one has to face their struggles alone. The bonds of community became a lifeline, offering her protection, comfort, and a path toward healing. As Amara moves forward, she does so with a deep understanding of her own power. She has become an advocate, using her voice to speak for those who cannot yet speak for themselves. Her journey from fear to empowerment is a reminder that even the darkest moments can lead to something brighter. She now stands as a beacon of hope for others facing similar battles, showing that it is possible to reclaim one's life, no matter how dire the circumstances may seem. For Lila and Mason, their mother's courage has shaped their future. They are no longer children trapped by the fear of their father's anger. Instead, they are growing into compassionate, confident individuals who know the value of love, safety, and resilience. The trauma they faced will not define them, and Amara's strength will guide them as they continue to heal and thrive. The conclusion of Amara's story leaves us with an important message. Though life may test us in unimaginable ways, we have the capacity to rise above, to rebuild, and to find hope even after the storm. Amara's journey is proof that with courage, the support of a community, and an unshakable belief in one's own worth, it is possible to move from surviving to truly living.